Hey guys. Tonight we go back further than anyone has ever taken you before. Further than castles. Further than kingdoms. Further than the first cities, the first farms, the first wars over land that hadn't even been named yet. Tonight we go back to a time so distant that the very concept of history doesn't exist, because nothing is being written down, nothing is being recorded, and no one around you has any idea that one day someone will try to explain what their life was like to an audience sitting in the dark thousands of years later. Tonight we explore life before fire. Not the discovery of fire. Not the moment someone first controlled a flame. But everything that came before that moment. The world that existed when your ancestors woke up every single morning with no guarantee of warmth, no reliable way to cook food, no light source they could control, and no protection from the dark beyond their own bodies and the people willing to stay close to them. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Pull the blanket a little higher. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not uncomfortable cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for an extra blanket or turn the thermostat up 2 degrees. This is something older than that. Something that sits in your bones and reminds every part of you, quietly and persistently, that you are a warm-blooded animal in a world that has absolutely no obligation to keep you that way. The sky above you is shifting from black to the deep gray blue of early dawn. The ground beneath you is hard. Whatever you slept on last night, whether it was a pile of dry leaves, a mat of woven grass, or simply the earth itself, it has done a reasonable job of insulating you from the worst of it. But only barely. And only because of the bodies pressed against yours through the night. This is where you are. Somewhere in Africa, or perhaps what will eventually become Southern Europe, hundreds of thousands of years before anyone will use the word civilization. You are a member of a small group of early humans, perhaps 15 people, perhaps 30, living in and around a landscape of open grassland, scattered trees, rocky outcrops, and rivers that run clear and cold in the dry season and brown and swollen in the wet one. You have no fixed address. You move when the food moves. You stay when staying makes sense. And right now, in these first gray minutes of morning, before the sun has fully cleared the horizon, the most important fact about your existence is the simplest one. You are cold. And there is nothing you can do about it except wait for the sun. That might sound manageable. You've been cold before. You've survived cold nights and cold mornings. But here's the difference. In your world, cold is temporary. It's a condition you pass through on your way to warmth that you control. Here, cold isn't temporary. It's the baseline. It's the default state of the world, and warmth is the temporary thing, the thing that visits during the middle of the day and then leaves again without asking permission. And your entire existence, everything about how you sleep and where you sleep and who you sleep near, is organized around managing that fact. So you do what you've always done. You wait. You press yourself slightly closer to the person beside you, not out of affection exactly, though that exists too, but out of pure thermal logic. 2 bodies are warmer than 1. 3 are warmer than 2. The group is warmth. The group is survival. And in a few minutes, when the sun begins to climb and the air starts to lose its sharpest edge, you will begin to move. But not yet. For now, you simply exist in the gray morning light, breathing slowly, waiting for the world to warm up enough to make movement worthwhile. This is how every single day begins. This is how every day has always begun. And this is just the cold. Let's talk about food, because food is the second thing your mind moves toward once the cold becomes manageable enough to function through. And food, in this world, is not a simple problem. It is the entire structure of your day. Not because eating itself is complicated, but because finding something worth eating, getting to it, and then actually processing it with a body and a set of teeth that were designed for exactly this purpose but still find it genuinely difficult, all of that takes most of the available daylight hours. In your world, you solve hunger in minutes. You walk to a refrigerator, or a cabinet, or a restaurant, and within a very short time, food appears in front of you, already prepared, already safe, already broken down into a form your body can handle with minimal effort. The process of turning raw ingredients into a meal happens somewhere else, by someone else, using tools and techniques that have been refined over thousands of years specifically to make eating fast, comfortable, and reliable. Here, none of that exists. Not the refrigerator. Not the cabinet. Not the restaurant. Not the tools. Not the techniques. And most critically, not the fire that would make everything easier, softer, safer, and more calorie efficient in ways that have reshaped the entire trajectory of human evolution. What you have instead is this. You have your hands. You have your teeth. You have your knowledge of the landscape, built up over years of observation and passed down from the people who raised you. You have the collective knowledge of your group, which is considerable but not infinite. And you have time. Large amounts of time that will be consumed almost entirely by the act of finding, acquiring, and consuming enough calories to get through another day. The morning begins with movement. The group spreads out slightly across the landscape, not so far that anyone becomes isolated, but enough to cover ground efficiently. You know this area. You know where certain plants grow, which trees produce fruit at which time of year, which rocks shelter edible insects underneath them, which dry stream beds are worth checking after rain. This knowledge isn't written anywhere. It lives in your memory and the memories of the people around you, accumulated through seasons and years of direct experience. You find something. A cluster of tubers growing at the base of a dead tree, their location betrayed by the particular pattern of leaves at ground level that you've learned to recognize. You dig them out with a pointed stick, working carefully, pulling the roots free from the earth without breaking them. They're dense, fibrous, covered in soil. You brush them off as best you can and bite into one. It's hard. Much harder than you expected if you're coming from a world where vegetables are routinely softened by heat before eating. Your jaw works steadily, grinding down the fibrous material, breaking it apart slowly. The flavor is somewhere between earthy and bitter, not unpleasant exactly, but not what you'd describe as enjoyable either. More neutral than anything else, the way food tastes when it hasn't been combined with anything, when no salt has been added, when no heat has changed its chemistry into something more palatable. And here's the thing that matters most. Even though you're eating, your body isn't getting everything it could from this food. Without cooking, many of the nutrients locked inside these tubers are significantly harder to extract. Your digestive system will work overtime processing the raw material, burning energy in the process of breaking down things that heat would have already broken down for you. Cooking, when humans eventually learn to control fire, doesn't just make food taste better. It essentially pre-digests it, making far more of its caloric and nutritional content available to the human body with far less effort. A cooked meal feeds you more completely than a raw one of identical size. But you don't know that yet. You know only what you can observe. And what you can observe is that eating takes a long time, that some foods make you feel better than others afterward, and that the particular tuber you're chewing right now is going to take a while before your jaw is willing to declare victory over it. This is breakfast. Let's talk about what your body actually looks like in this world, because it matters more than you might think. You are, in most respects, anatomically identical to a modern human. The same basic structure, the same organs, the same brain capacity. If you cleaned up, dressed appropriately, and walked into a modern city, you would not look meaningfully different from anyone else on the street. Human beings have not changed substantially in physical form over the past several 100,000 years. But your body's relationship with the world around it is different from what modern humans typically experience, not because your biology is different, but because the conditions are. Your feet are tougher than any modern person's because you have never worn shoes and the soles of your feet have been building calluses since the day you started walking. Your hands are stronger than most modern hands because everything requiring strength happens with your hands directly, no tools mediating between your grip and the world. Your senses are sharper in certain respects, not because your sensory organs are better designed, but because you actually use them constantly in ways modern humans rarely do. You smell the rain before it arrives, not as a trick, but because you've learned through experience what that particular change in air pressure and humidity means for the next few hours. You notice movement at the edge of your vision in ways that feel almost instinctive, because ignoring movement at the edge of your vision has, over many generations, been a reliable way to get eaten. You track changes in the behavior of animals around you, because animals notice things about the environment before you do, and watching them is one of the most reliable early warning systems available to you. Your body runs leaner than a modern body typically does, not by choice but by circumstance. There are no surplus calories here to store beyond what your body can extract from what you've eaten. You are neither starving nor full in the modern sense of either word. You exist in a state of what might be called nutritional equilibrium, always needing more, always finding just enough, the balance constantly shifting with the seasons and the landscape and the luck of any given day. In summer, things are relatively easier. More plants are producing fruit. More animals are visible and active. The days are longer, giving more time to find food. The temperatures are manageable and sometimes comfortable. In winter, everything becomes harder. Plants die back. Animals move or become harder to find. The days shorten. The cold deepens. And the caloric math of survival gets tighter in ways that have nothing abstract about them. You can feel the difference in your own body, in the way your energy dips in the afternoons, in the way hunger becomes a background presence that never entirely goes away. This is your relationship with your own body. It is not comfortable in the modern sense. But it is real in a way that modern comfort sometimes isn't. Now let's talk about the dark. Because the dark is the thing that changes everything most completely, more than the cold, more than the food, more than any of the other challenges of this existence. The dark is the thing that prehistoric humans have no answer for, no tool for, no strategy that fully solves it. And it shapes every single day by determining when the day ends and what happens after. In your world, darkness is a minor inconvenience you solve by flipping a switch. Light appears. The darkness retreats. Whatever you were doing continues exactly as it was. You barely register the transition. The concept of being genuinely stopped by darkness is so foreign to modern experience that it's almost impossible to imagine without actually experiencing it. Here, darkness is not an inconvenience. It is a hard boundary. When the sun goes down, the world fundamentally changes, and not in a metaphorical way. The landscape you know, the grassland you've been moving through all day, the trees you recognize, the paths you've worn into the ground through years of repeated use, all of it disappears into a blackness that is absolute in a way modern humans almost never experience. Think about the darkest night you've ever stood in. Now remove every artificial light source from the surrounding environment. Remove the distant glow of cities. Remove the faint illumination of streetlights too far away to see directly but still contributing something to the sky. Remove the light from your phone screen, the indicator lights on your electronics, the faint glow of anything manufactured. What you're left with, on a cloudy night with no moon, is a darkness so complete that your eyes, fully adjusted, can see almost nothing. Not your hand in front of your face. Not the ground directly beneath your feet. Almost nothing. This is what night is, here, in this world, on most nights. And into that darkness, from multiple directions and at varying distances, the sounds of animals fill the air. Some of these animals are harmless. But some of them are not. And in the total darkness of a moonless night, you cannot tell which is which without getting close enough to find out, which is not something you want to do. The predators of this landscape have evolved over millions of years alongside creatures very much like you. They know you. Not individually, not personally, but categorically. They know what you sound like when you move. They know what you smell like. They know that you are, in the dark, significantly less dangerous than you are in daylight. They know that you cannot see them coming the way they can see you. And some of them are very, very good at using darkness as a tool. So the group does what groups of vulnerable animals have always done in dangerous environments. It pulls together. It finds a defensible position, a rocky outcrop, a spot beneath an overhanging cliff, a dense cluster of trees with clear sight lines in multiple directions. It gets as small and as quiet as possible. And it waits. This is nighttime. Not sleep exactly, not yet, but the withdrawal from the world that darkness forces. The collective shrinking of your group's footprint to something small enough that the dark cannot find it easily. Someone stays alert while others rest. Someone listens while others drift into the light sleep that is all most of you manage in the first hours of night. Not because you're anxious in a modern, psychological sense, but because part of your brain never fully switches off here, never fully releases vigilance, because vigilance is infrastructure in a world where the dark is genuinely dangerous. And this goes on for hours. Not 2 or 3 hours. Many hours. Because the night is long here, especially in winter, and the sun takes its time returning. Let's slow down and talk about what you actually do with your body when you sleep in this world, because it's different from modern sleep in ways that matter. Not different in terms of the basic biology of sleep, which is largely the same, but different in terms of what sleep looks like from the outside, where it happens, how deep it goes, and how it's shared. You don't sleep alone. Almost no one in this world sleeps alone if they can help it, not because loneliness is the concern, though social connection matters here too, but because sleeping alone is genuinely more dangerous and significantly colder than sleeping in a group. The mathematics of shared body heat are real and significant. A cluster of bodies radiates warmth that a single body cannot generate for itself. In cold months, that difference is the difference between waking up functional and waking up barely functional. Or not waking up at all. Southwest, you sleep pressed close to others. Children tucked against adults. Older members of the group positioned slightly toward the center where warmth collects most reliably. This isn't a conscious social decision every night. It's just what happens when everyone lies down in a small space and cold air surrounds them. Bodies find warmth instinctively. The arrangement sorts itself out. You sleep in shifts, though not formally. There's no schedule posted somewhere saying who watches from which hour to which hour. Instead, it works the way it works with many social animals. Some members of the group are naturally lighter sleepers. Some wake easily at sounds. Some are constitutionally more alert during the dark hours. These individuals end up doing more of the nighttime listening simply because they end up doing more of the waking. No one assigned them this role. They drift into it because their own nervous systems point them there. Your sleep itself is lighter than modern sleep in certain ways, not because your brain works differently, but because the environment provides less safety than modern environments do. Deep, truly unconscious sleep is a luxury that requires a reasonable baseline of security. In a world where something large and hungry might approach from any direction at any moment, the brain maintains a level of background alertness even in sleep that it doesn't need to maintain in a locked apartment on the 14th floor. Not enough alertness to prevent rest, but enough to respond quickly when a sound breaks the pattern of the night. This light sleep, punctuated by moments of waking, spread across the bodies of a group that is never all fully unconscious at the same time, is the sleep of an animal that has not yet solved the problem of the dark. It works. It sustains the group. But it is not the deep, uninterrupted, completely safe rest that becomes possible later, once humans learn to build walls between themselves and the night, and eventually to fill those walls with light. Somewhere in the middle of all this, let's talk about water. Because water is the other constant, the other daily necessity that shapes your movement and your decisions in ways that modern life has almost entirely removed from conscious attention. You don't have running water. You don't have filtered water. You don't have a reliable supply of clean water delivered to you through infrastructure you don't have to think about. You have whatever water exists in the natural landscape around you, in rivers, in streams, in pools that collect after rain, in the morning dew that collects on leaves and grasses in the early hours before the sun burns it off. Water determines where you can go and how long you can stay there. A landscape with reliable water sources is one you can occupy for extended periods. A landscape that dries out in certain seasons becomes somewhere you have to leave, even if everything else about it is favorable. Water is geography. Water is timing. Water is one of the fundamental forces that push and pull your group across the landscape from season to season. And the water itself is not safe in the modern sense. It contains things. Microorganisms, parasites, bacteria that your body has some defenses against, built through generations of exposure, but that can still make you seriously ill when the dose is high enough or the particular organism is one your immune system hasn't encountered before. Waterborne illness in this world isn't an abstract risk. It's a recurring reality, something that cycles through groups periodically, something that weakens people for days or weeks, something that the very young and the very old can die from in circumstances where a modern medical system would treat it as a minor inconvenience. You drink anyway. Of course you drink anyway. Thirst is not a negotiable feeling. But you drink with a degree of discrimination that your body has built into itself over generations. Moving water is generally safer than still water. Water from higher elevations is generally safer than water from low, stagnant pools. Your group knows which sources have made people sick before and avoids them when alternatives exist. This knowledge, accumulated through painful trial and error across many generations, is one of the most practically important things the group carries. Not written anywhere. Not stored anywhere except in memory and behavior. But real, and genuinely life-saving in its application. The act of drinking itself is not the simple, private, individual act it is in modern life. Water collection is often a group activity, because going to water means going to a place where other animals also go to water, including predators who have learned that prey animals concentrate around water sources at predictable times. So you drink quickly. You stay alert. You keep an eye on the surrounding landscape in a way you don't have to when you're eating the tubers you dug up earlier, because the tuber patch was a safe place and the riverbank is not always. This is what water looks like before it's solved. Before wells, before aqueducts, before pipes, before filters, before the infrastructure that makes clean water appear on command and invisible in its complexity. Just a landscape full of water that may or may not be where you need it to be, may or may not be safe to drink, and definitely requires your full attention every time you approach it. Let's talk about the group, because the group is where everything actually happens. Not the individual. Not the heroic lone figure navigating a hostile world through personal skill and determination. The group. The collective. The 15 or 20 or 30 people whose survival is so intertwined with yours that separating them is largely a theoretical exercise. In modern life, other people are optional in a way that is historically very unusual. You can, if you choose, meet most of your basic needs entirely through transactions with strangers mediated by money and infrastructure. You can live alone, eat alone, sleep alone, work alone, and go days without a single meaningful interaction with another human being. This is not ideal for most people, and there's good evidence it's not particularly healthy, but it is possible. The infrastructure of modern civilization makes individual survival genuinely feasible in a way it has never been through most of human history. Here, individual survival is not genuinely feasible. Not in the long run. Not in any practical sense. A single human being, removed from a group and left alone in this landscape, is in serious difficulty almost immediately. Not because they're stupid or weak, but because the tasks required for survival are genuinely numerous enough and energy-demanding enough that one person cannot perform all of them adequately while simultaneously performing all the others. Collecting enough food while also maintaining enough vigilance while also managing shelter and staying warm and tending to illness when it arrives and watching for danger from multiple directions and navigating an unfamiliar landscape and making decisions under uncertainty, all of this is simply beyond what one person can reliably sustain indefinitely. The group solves problems that individuals cannot solve alone. The group distributes the cognitive load of survival across multiple minds, so that no single person has to track everything simultaneously. The group provides the extra pair of eyes that catches the movement in the grass that the first person missed. The group provides the experienced elder who remembers that a particular plant is dangerous even though it looks edible, remembered from the last time someone young and curious and uninformed ate it 20 years ago. The group provides the warm bodies that make sleep possible in cold weather. The group provides the coordinated action that makes hunting larger animals possible. The group is not optional. The group is infrastructure. And this means that your relationship with the other members of your group is one of the most fundamental and practically important things in your life. Not your relationship with them in an abstract or sentimental sense, though that matters too, but your relationship with them in the sense of whether they trust you, whether you have demonstrated over time that you contribute reliably to the collective effort, whether the balance of what you take and what you give is acceptable to the people around you. Because the group's tolerance is not unlimited. A member who consistently takes more than they contribute, who fails to share, who makes decisions that endanger others for personal benefit, who cannot be counted on in the situations that matter most, such a member creates a problem for the group. Not a philosophical problem. A practical one. And practical problems in this world get addressed practically. Exclusion from a group in this world is not a social embarrassment. It is a survival crisis. Being pushed to the margins, finding that people stop including you in food sharing, stop making space for you in the warmest part of the sleeping cluster, stop coordinating their movements with yours, is one of the most serious things that can happen to a person in this landscape. Not immediately fatal. But the direction it points is clear. So you contribute. You share. You show up. You do the things that need to be done even when you're tired, which is often because everyone is tired here most of the time. Not because you're consciously calculating your social position, but because the environment has shaped your instincts over many generations to find cooperation natural, to find sharing satisfying, to feel discomfort when you take more than you give, because the people whose instincts worked that way were the people whose groups kept them, and the people their groups kept were the people who survived. Now let's talk about communication, because it's one of the things most people assume they know about early humans and most often get wrong. Not wrong in the sense of having the wrong specific facts, but wrong in the sense of not quite grasping what communication looks like when language is not yet fully formed, or at least not yet formed in the way modern humans use it. You communicate. Constantly, actually. You are a social species, and social species are communicating with each other at every moment, through sound, through gesture, through facial expression, through body posture, through the spatial relationship between bodies, through timing, through what you choose to do and when you choose to do it. None of this requires complex language. Much of it doesn't require language at all. You know when someone in your group is afraid before they make a sound, because fear has a posture, a stillness, a particular quality of attention that the human body expresses involuntarily and that other humans read instinctively. You know when the dominant members of the group are in good moods versus bad ones, because that distinction matters enormously for how the next few hours will go. You know when someone has found something worth sharing, because the way they move back toward the group carries that information in the pace and angle and energy of their approach. But the limits of communication without fully developed language are also real, and they matter in specific practical situations. The situation where they matter most is planning. Detailed, sequential planning. The kind of planning that requires sharing a complex idea about something that isn't immediately visible, something that will happen later, something that involves multiple steps, conditional actions, or the coordination of many people around a shared abstract goal. Imagine trying to coordinate an ambush hunt without the ability to describe in detail what each person should do, where they should position themselves, what signal will indicate when to move, what to do if the animal goes left instead of right, what the backup plan is if the primary approach fails. All of that coordination, that multi-step conditional planning, is significantly harder without complex language. Not impossible, but harder. And the difficulty shows in outcomes. Groups of early humans hunt. They cooperate. They achieve things together that individuals couldn't achieve alone. But the ceiling on what they can plan and execute is lower than it will be later, when language becomes fully developed and humans can share arbitrarily complex ideas with each other across time and space. The gap between what you can think and what you can share with others is one of the real constraints of this world, one of the things that limits what's possible in ways that are frustrating and invisible at the same time. Let's talk about time. Not the time of day, though that matters here in ways it often doesn't consciously in modern life. Let's talk about time in the bigger sense. The sense of past and future. Memory and anticipation. You have memory. Detailed, rich, autobiographical memory of things that happened to you and things you've observed. You remember the time 3 seasons ago when you found the large grove of fruit trees 2 days' walk to the east. You remember the face of the person who taught you which plants were safe to eat. You remember a night years ago when something large approached the sleeping group and what the sound was like and how the situation resolved and what it felt like afterward. This memory is practically essential. It's the database your decision-making draws from. It's the record of what works and what doesn't, maintained not in books or storage systems but in the living tissue of your brain, supplemented by the memories of the people around you who experienced the same events from different angles. But your sense of the future is more constrained than a modern person's. Not because you can't think ahead, you clearly can, but because the planning horizon that's practically relevant to your daily life is much shorter. You think about tomorrow. You think about the next season. You think about recurring patterns that you've observed over years. But the kind of extended future planning that modern humans engage in, planning for events decades away, structuring behavior around goals that will only pay off in years or generations, that kind of long horizon planning requires infrastructure, requires writing, requires institutions, requires the ability to store information outside of individual human brains, none of which exists here. This isn't a limitation in the sense of a deficiency. It's just a different relationship with time, appropriate to a world that is immediate and concrete and present tense in ways that modernity isn't. The urgency of today is real here. The urgency of today is so real that it consumes most of the available cognitive bandwidth. The future will take care of itself or it won't, but the present, the next few hours, whether the food has been found, whether everyone is safe, whether the weather is about to change, whether the group is in the right place to meet the night, that's what matters now. Let's slow down and notice something that gets missed in most discussions of prehistoric life. Something that doesn't show up in the dramatic narratives about survival and predators and harsh conditions. Something quieter than that. There are good moments here. There are genuinely, simply good moments in this existence that have nothing to do with survival and everything to do with being alive in a world that is extraordinary in its own way. The moment in mid-morning when the sun finally reaches the spot where you're working and the warmth hits your skin and everything about your body relaxes slightly in response. Not a profound moment. Just a nice one. The kind of physical comfort that your body registers as good and right without any interpretation required. The moment when you find fruit. Ripe fruit, sweet fruit, the kind that your tongue recognizes as the best possible version of what you've been eating in its less ripe form for weeks. The pleasure of this is real. Not different in kind from the pleasure of good food in any other context. Just more immediate, more earned, more directly connected to the work of finding it. The moments with other people. Not the dramatic moments of cooperation against danger, but the quieter ones. The long afternoons when food has been found and the immediate pressures have eased and the group sits together in whatever shade is available and does the things that social animals do when they're not in immediate crisis, which is groom each other and make sounds at each other and watch the children play and be physically present together in ways that feel fundamentally right because your species has been doing them for millions of years. Children in this world play. Not with manufactured toys. With the world itself. With water and mud and sticks and each other. Loudly, imaginatively, with the complete absorption that characterizes children's play in every human context ever observed. Watching children play looks the same here as it does in any other human setting, because play is one of the things that transcends the conditions of any particular era. It happens because young humans need it to develop, and young humans need it to develop because that's what young humans have always been like. There is laughter here. Whatever laughter was in these early humans, it was functionally the same as modern laughter. The involuntary, contagious, social bonding response to something that registers as funny or surprising or incongruous. It happens. It spreads through a group the way it always has. Someone slips. Someone makes a sound at the wrong moment. Someone's attempt at something fails in an unexpected way. And the response is recognizable across any gulf of time and culture because it comes from somewhere older than culture itself. These moments don't negate the difficulty. The cold is still cold. The food is still hard to find and harder to eat. The dark is still dangerous. The parasites are still there. The risk of injury and illness and loss is constant and real. But the good moments are also real, and they matter, and they happen, and they are part of what this existence actually is. Now let's talk about something that gets almost no attention in discussions of prehistoric life but that shapes everything about how your group functions. Let's talk about knowledge. Specifically, how knowledge works in a world without writing, without storage, without any way to record information outside of the living human mind. Everything your group knows about the world, everything useful, every piece of practical wisdom that makes the difference between surviving and not surviving, is stored in people. In their memories. In their habits. In the skills their hands know how to perform. In the patterns of behavior they follow without consciously thinking about them because those patterns have been so thoroughly internalized that they no longer require active thought. This is genuinely remarkable when you think about what it means. The accumulated practical wisdom of many generations of experience in this specific landscape, all of it lives in the bodies and minds of the people around you. Not backed up anywhere. Not written anywhere. Not stored anywhere outside the people themselves. Which means that losing people is not just a tragedy in the human sense. It is, quite literally, losing knowledge. An elder who dies before transferring what they know has taken that knowledge with them. A skilled hunter who is injured and can no longer demonstrate techniques loses the ability to pass those techniques on in the most effective way. A person who knows which plant treats a particular illness, who learned it from someone who is now gone, carries that information as the sole copy of something potentially irreplaceable. This is why elders matter in these societies in ways that go far beyond sentiment. The oldest members of a group are the living archives of its most accumulated experience. They've seen more seasons, more unusual weather events, more animal behavior, more of what works and what doesn't in this particular landscape than anyone else. Their survival is not just important for its own sake. Their survival is the preservation of a library. And this is why knowledge gets shared so deliberately, through story, through demonstration, through the repetition of practices until they become habits, through the careful attention that younger people give to older ones during the moments when the older ones are doing things the younger ones haven't fully mastered yet. The transfer of knowledge is not formal here. There are no classrooms. There are no curricula. But it happens constantly, in the small moments of daily life, in the demonstration and observation and imitation that form the actual transmission channel through which everything the group knows flows from one generation to the next. Let's talk about what happens when something goes wrong. Not the dramatic, sudden kind of wrong, though that exists too, but the slow, grinding kind of wrong. Illness. Injury. The accumulated wear of a life lived in direct physical contact with a demanding environment. Your body is your only tool in a very fundamental sense. Everything you're able to do in this world, everything you contribute to the group, depends on your body functioning well enough to do it. And your body, like all bodies, fails sometimes. Not catastrophically and all at once, usually, but incrementally. A foot develops an infection. A tooth begins to cause pain. A back injury from years of carrying heavy things starts to limit movement. An illness moves through the group, carried by the water or the food or the proximity of bodies, leaving everyone weaker for a period of days or weeks. There is medicine here. Not medicine in the modern sense, not anything synthesized in a laboratory or tested through clinical trials, but medicine in the sense of accumulated knowledge about which plants produce effects that are useful in particular circumstances. Bark that reduces fever when chewed. Leaves that apply to a wound slow infection. Roots that ease stomach pain or reduce inflammation. This knowledge exists. It is imperfect and incomplete and sometimes wrong, and the mechanisms behind it are completely unknown to the people using it. But it is real, and some of it works, and it has been accumulated through exactly the same process of trial and error and observation that produces all knowledge in this world. What doesn't exist is the ability to do much about serious injury or serious illness. A broken leg in this world is a crisis in a way a broken leg in a modern hospital is not. Not necessarily fatal, but potentially so, and certainly life-altering in ways that require the group to adapt. A person who cannot move effectively cannot contribute in the ways they usually contribute. The group has to compensate. The group does compensate, because that's what groups do, because reciprocity and mutual aid are built into the way your group operates at a level deep enough that it doesn't require discussion or calculation. You take care of each other because that's what the group is for. But the limits are real. And some things that modern medicine would treat as minor, an infected wound, a difficult childbirth, a fever that goes on too long, are genuine threats to life here in ways that modernity has largely removed from most people's daily reality. Let's talk about what the landscape actually looks like. Because modern humans tend to imagine prehistoric environments through the lens of wildlife documentaries, which emphasize drama and danger, or through the lens of romantic imagination, which emphasizes beauty and peace. The reality is neither of those things exactly, but contains elements of both. The landscape is extraordinary in ways that are genuinely difficult to communicate to someone who has only ever lived in a world where wildness has been pushed to the margins of human experience. The scale of animal life is larger than anything most modern humans have seen outside of specific protected areas. Not just individual large animals, though those exist, but the sheer density of life that a world without large-scale human agriculture and human habitat destruction contains. Birds in numbers that would seem impossible. Insects in quantities that are genuinely overwhelming at certain times of year. Animals of many kinds moving through the landscape with the confidence of creatures that have not yet learned to fear the sight of human beings. This is not entirely comforting. It is also not entirely a threat. It is simply the world as it is before humans have done what humans will eventually do to it, which is reduce it systematically and irreversibly into something that serves human purposes more directly. The plants are extraordinary too. Not in a manicured way, not in the way a garden is beautiful, but in the way that unrestricted growth is beautiful, the way that a landscape doing exactly what it wants to do without human intervention looks beautiful to anyone who takes the time to actually look at it. There is color here that depends on the season and the region, the gold of dry grassland at the end of a long dry season, the vivid green that appears within days of the first rain, the particular bronze of certain tree barks, the deep blue of clear water over light-colored stone. You don't think about the beauty in the way a modern person consciously thinks about beautiful things. You live inside it. It's the texture of your world. But you are not immune to it either. The human response to natural beauty is old. Older than art, older than language in its fully developed form. When a sunset is extraordinary, something in you responds to that. Not with words, probably, but with something. An attention, a recognition, a brief pause in the constant business of survival to register that the world is doing something worth noticing. These moments exist here too. They are not separate from the difficulty. They are woven into it, the way beauty and hardship are always woven into each other in a life lived close to the natural world without the buffer of technology between you and it. Now let's get to the thing that is missing. Not missing in the sense of something lost, because it was never there to lose. Missing in the sense of something not yet invented, not yet discovered, not yet understood by anyone alive in this moment. Fire. Not the concept of fire. You know fire. You have seen fire. Lightning strikes trees sometimes and they burn, and the fire spreads and the grassland burns and the animals flee and the smoke rises, and after it's over, the burned ground shows new growth within weeks that brings different animals and different plants and briefly transforms the landscape. You have felt the heat of these fires from a safe distance. You have seen them extinguish themselves when they run out of fuel or when rain comes. But you have never controlled fire. Never kept a flame alive. Never fed it, directed it, carried it from one place to another. Never woken up in the morning next to a fire that was still burning because someone kept it through the night. The fire you know is wildfire, uncontrolled, something to be avoided or fled from, not something to be tended and used. And here is the staggering thing. The gap between the world you live in and the world that fire would create is not a small gap. It is not a modest improvement. It is a transformation so complete that it would change almost every aspect of daily existence in ways you cannot fully imagine from where you're standing. Fire would mean warmth that doesn't depend on bodies. Warmth that you carry with you. Warmth that you can make more of by adding wood. Warmth that makes the cold into something manageable instead of something you endure through proximity and luck. Fire would mean cooked food. And cooked food means something so practically significant that it's hard to overstate. Cooking pre-digests food. It breaks down cell walls. It neutralizes many of the toxins that make certain plants dangerous raw. It kills many of the pathogens that make raw meat and contaminated water so dangerous. It softens fibrous foods enough that eating them takes minutes instead of the hour your jaw currently spends on a single tuber. And all of that together means that the same quantity of food provides dramatically more usable calories to a body that has cooked it. A body that eats cooked food regularly can, over time, support a larger brain on the same caloric budget, because the work of digestion decreases enough to free up energy for other purposes. Fire would mean light. The ability to push back the dark. Not completely, not infinitely, but enough. Enough to extend the working day beyond sunset. Enough to make the sleeping place visible and known rather than pitch black and uncertain. Enough to see what's approaching before it's already on top of you. Fire would mean protection from predators. Not absolute protection, but significant protection. Because the predators that move through this landscape at night, the ones that see in the dark far better than you do, are not eager to approach a burning flame. Fire is alien to them. Fire is unpredictable. Fire is not something any animal, including the large cats that currently make the night dangerous, has ever learned to deal with comfortably. A fire at the edge of a camp is a barrier that no fence could replicate. Fire would mean the ability to process materials. To harden wood. To work stone differently. To eventually smelt metal. To cook clay into pottery. To transform raw materials from the world into tools that the world couldn't produce by itself. The cascade of technologies that follows the control of fire doesn't happen overnight. But it begins with fire. Everything begins with fire. You don't know any of this yet. You know only the wildfire you've seen, the thing you flee from, the thing that clears the landscape and brings new growth and occasionally takes the lives of animals unlucky enough to be caught by it. You know that it is hot and that it burns things and that it moves in unpredictable ways. What you don't know yet is that somewhere in the future, in a moment that will change everything, someone is going to stop fleeing from it and start reaching toward it instead. Let's spend some time with what the nights are actually like. Not the abstract danger of nighttime. The texture of it. The particular quality of lying in the dark in a world that doesn't have a single artificial light source anywhere. The sky, on clear nights, is something that modern humans have almost entirely lost access to. Not because the sky has changed, but because light pollution has put a veil between modern humans and what was always up there. In a world without artificial light, on a clear night, the Milky Way is not a faint smear at the edge of your vision. It is a structure. A dense, detailed river of light crossing the entire sky, bright enough to cast faint shadows on the ground beneath it, bright enough to give your fully dark adapted eyes something real to work with. You don't know what it is. You don't have the conceptual framework to understand that what you're looking at is a galaxy seen from the inside, that each point of light is a sun like the one that warms you in the daytime, that the scale of what you're seeing is so vast as to be meaningless by any measure available to you. You don't know any of that. But you look at it. You look at it every clear night, because the sky at night is one of the things there is to look at, and you look at it the way humans have always looked at things that are extraordinary, with an attention that is both simple and profound, taking it in without necessarily having words for what you're experiencing. The stars move through the night. Not quickly, but perceptibly, if you watch long enough. They rise and set. They appear in different positions at different times of year. The regular patterns of this movement are things your group has noticed and recorded not in writing but in memory, in the kind of practical knowledge that says, when that particular bright star appears in that particular position in the eastern sky just before dawn, the rainy season is 2 months away. When that cluster of stars disappears below the western horizon at sunset, the coldest nights are coming. The sky is a calendar here. A compass. A navigation tool. A timepiece. Not understood in its physics but understood in its patterns, which is really all you need it to be. And on the nights when clouds cover it, the darkness is more complete than anything with those stars present, and the night feels different. Closer. More immediate. Less navigable. The loss of the stars on a cloudy night is not just an aesthetic one. It is a practical one. Let's talk about what happens when you lose someone. Because people die in this world in ways and at ages that modern medicine has largely pushed back, and the group has to continue when they do. Children die more frequently here than they do in modern contexts. The very young are the most vulnerable, in every time and place, because their immune systems are still developing and their bodies are small enough that illness and injury affect them faster. Not every child born into this group will survive to adulthood. Some will die of illness. Some of injury. Some of the simple accumulated risks of a life lived in a landscape that contains real dangers for small, not yet competent humans. This grief is real. Whatever emotion grief is, whatever evolutionary purpose it serves, whether it's the signal that tells a social animal it has lost a member of its coalition and needs to adjust, or something more than that, something more like the specific human experience of loss that most people recognize from their own lives, it happens here. People mourn. They mourn in whatever way their capacity for expression allows. And then life continues, because it always continues, and the demands of survival don't pause for grief. Adults die too. Earlier than modern adults, on average, because the accumulated wear of a physical life without adequate nutrition and without medical care and with genuine physical danger as a constant background feature shortens life in ways that modern medicine has extended. The elders of this group are not old in the modern sense. 40 is not young by modern standards, but it represents something different here. A person who has survived long enough to be genuinely rare, whose accumulated experience is correspondingly valuable, who carries within themselves more seasons and more events and more knowledge than anyone younger. When an elder dies, the group is smaller in ways that go beyond the simple reduction in bodies. A knowledge base has been reduced. An authority has been lost. A memory of events that no longer has a living holder is simply gone. This is grief that has a practical dimension built into it, which is not the same as saying it is purely practical. Let's come back to the fire. Because this is where everything is heading. This is the thing that everything else in this story is building toward, even though you don't know it yet, even though no one alive right now knows it yet. Somewhere, not in this moment but not impossibly far away in the story of your species, someone is going to make a choice that changes everything. They're going to approach a burning tree. Not to flee, not to gather at a safe distance and wait for it to extinguish itself, but to approach it. Maybe to take something from it. A burning branch, a glowing ember on the end of a stick. Maybe driven by curiosity. Maybe by something less defined than that, some impulse that doesn't have a name yet because the concept it would name doesn't exist yet. And then they're going to do something with what they've taken. They're going to carry it. They're going to keep it alive somehow, blowing on it, feeding it, protecting it from rain and wind. They're going to bring it back to the group. And the group is going to experience, for the first time, the thing that every human being who has ever lived after that moment has taken more or less for granted. Controlled fire. A flame that is yours. A warmth that you made and that you can keep. You don't get to see that moment. Not from here. Not yet. You are still in the world that precedes it, the world where the cold is managed through bodies and the dark is managed through fear and the food is processed by your jaw and the night belongs to things that see better in it than you do. But you are close to it. Closer than the many hundreds of thousands of years of humans before you who lived in the same conditions. Somewhere in the generations ahead of you, someone is going to figure it out. And when they do, the world you've been living in, the one built entirely around managing a cold, dark, raw, unlit existence, is going to start becoming something else. Not quickly. Not all at once. Not in a single dramatic revolutionary moment that immediately transforms everything. But direction has a way of accumulating. And the direction this is heading is toward a world where the dark gets smaller, where the cold gets more manageable, where the food gets easier to process, where the night becomes something you can push back against, where the margin between survival and death gets slightly wider, slightly more navigable, slightly more survivable. That gap, between the world you're living in right now and the world that fire will eventually create, is not a small gap. It is one of the largest gaps in the entire story of your species. And you are standing on the wrong side of it, for now, in the dark and the cold, eating raw food and listening to the night, and waiting, without knowing that you're waiting, for the thing that will change everything. In the meantime, the sun comes up. As it always does. As it has done without interruption for longer than your species has existed. The light returns first as a faint brightening at the horizon, then as color, the deep blue-gray of pre-dawn shifting through something close to purple and then to the pale gold of early morning. The temperature begins to climb. The sounds of the night, the predators that made their movements through the dark hours, begin to quiet as the day animals wake and fill the landscape with different sounds. Your group stirs. Bodies separate from their sleeping arrangements. Someone goes to the edge of the camp and looks out over the landscape in the flat morning light. Children are awake almost immediately, as children always are, as if the transition from sleep to full energy is instantaneous for them in a way it never quite is for adults. Someone begins moving toward the nearest water source. The day begins. The cold is already improving. Not gone, not yet, but improving. In another hour, when the sun has cleared the horizon entirely and begun its arc across the sky, the worst of it will be past. By midday, in the open sun, it will be warm enough to be comfortable. And then the afternoon will begin its slow decline back toward evening, back toward the cold, back toward the dark that is the other half of every day in this world. But that's later. Right now, there is this. The morning. The light returning. The group moving into another day of the life they live, the only life any of them have ever known, the life that is difficult and beautiful and full of small good things and large hard ones and completely without the thing that would make it easier in ways none of them can imagine. The fire that is coming will change everything. But today, it is not here yet. And so you live today the way you have lived every day before it, with your body and your hands and your group and your knowledge and whatever the landscape chooses to provide. It is, in the most literal possible sense, enough. It has to be.